Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay up to date and help the channel grow. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. And now, on with the show. You are listening to the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion with the one and only Gray. Greetings, opinion nerds. It is I, the one they call Gray, and we're going to be taking a look at director Christopher Nolan's latest IMAX epic, Oppenheimer, on this random act of opinion coming up right now. With a film like Oppenheimer, director Christopher Nolan's 3-hour IMAX experience based on the book American Prometheus by Kia Bird and Martin Sherwin, one is likely to find the cyclotron of conversation energetically colliding topics that are about the movie and yet not really about the movie. Some of them are interesting, some of them are banal, and some of them are ridiculous, bordering on insulting. There are always people out there looking for any point of entry to drum up some noise and score a few cheap social credit points for themselves. Their task is made substantially easier when their target is an object enjoying near universal acclaim, as dissenting voices, if they sound at least halfway credible, often stand out against the din of praise. These topics not being entirely devoid of merit doesn't make this mercenary behavior any less opportunistic, and for some people, opportunity is often where you contrive it. A movie is a chance to see the world from a perspective that is not your own, and all it asks us to do is set aside our own perspective for a couple of hours to do that. Is that really too much to ask? American physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, as the movie points out, the J stands for J, is one of the most significant figures of the 20th century, and there shouldn't be a person alive who's completed a high school education that hasn't at least heard the name. Unfortunately, as happens all too often, the education system has failed many, leaving Hollywood to take up the slack. To be brief, the film covers not quite the life of Oppenheimer, but at the very least his hand in bringing the field of quantum physics to American higher education and his work leading the project that built the first atomic bomb during World War II. The film also covers his conflicting activist side, first as a sympathizer for socialist groups looking to expand and protect workers' rights, and later urging caution and transparency as the world woke up to the danger of atomic power, a combination that eventually cost him his work and his reputation. In this, the film paints a picture of a troubled and complicated person who was many things to many people, becoming known as the father of the atomic age, while having his character raked over nuclear hot coals when his loyalty and integrity are called into question by a vindictive politician and a historically short-sighted military-industrial complex who saw his influence as a pothole in their road to nuclear domination. After World War II, Oppenheimer didn't want there to be any more atomic bombs, and America wanted to have the only atomic bombs, so you can see how a conflict might arise. While presenting the audience with a glimpse at the very human individuals making incredibly difficult choices at the time, the film, as far as I can tell, avoids taking a moral stance on the rightness or wrongness of the development and use of atomic weapons, choosing instead to present the question of whether or not humanity can responsibly manage the destructive potential of what we create, something that remains Cameron-esquely relevant as we blithely fumble face first into the era of AI. The film also suggests that Oppenheimer himself carried the arguably self-imposed burden of being the person who potentially lit the fuse on the bomb that will eventually destroy the human race. The film is a Swiss watch of precise filmmaking choices, seamless period recreations, natural but expressive cinematography, and surgical editing at the kind of relentless pace you expect more from a dramatic thriller like the director's The Dark Knight. While I acknowledge the film is bereft of the idiosyncrasies that provide the kind of slight slop that makes a film endearingly human, it remains an immersive film experience that, while long on minutes, is never short on substance, rolling over you from literally the first moments and never allowing you to escape its blast radius. And yet, if you were to visit the modern-day salons of social media or online culture journalism and lean in on one of the adjacent tables, what you might hear is less about how Nolan's machine-like exactitude creates emotional engagement while never succumbing to melodrama, and more about how the film fails some aspect of modern-day social awareness by not spending enough time on the women surrounding Oppenheimer or the Manhattan Project, the government operation responsible for developing and building the A-bomb, how the film contains awkward or unnecessary depictions of sex and female nudity for, quote, no reason, and its failure to measure up to the critically unserious Bechdel test. You might also hear how the film fails to draw a picture of the terrible effects these weapons had on the people in Japan and how it never admonishes their use or casts any of the players as a villain to punish. Some have even accused the film of trying to paint Oppenheimer as some kind of tragic hero, though I would need someone to gently guide me through that particular perspective. Oppenheimer packs a lot of storytelling onto its muscular frame, built from the asynchronous and intertwined perspectives of two characters, Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer and Robert Downey Jr.'s Lewis Strauss, the thankful return of the Downey that plays characters that aren't just heightened versions of himself. Coded between color and black and white photography, Nolan convinced Kodak to develop the 70mm gray tone negative used here. The emotionally terse and energetically edited material allows the storytelling to uncoil in a way that, on a basic filmmaking level, allows the presentation to remain unpredictable and interesting, which may be why the runtime seems to fly by. The film avoids the trappings of other so-called biopics by not truly being one, focusing more on the person in relation to their place in history than it does being a rundown of the life and times of J. Robert Oppenheimer. In this way, the film isn't trying to shape a story out of a span of a man's life so much as it's using elements of that life to tell a story about a complex human issue. And yet, the very things that make Oppenheimer, or any of us, the complex human creatures that we are, seem to be regarded as problematic for a character some believe we should see as either a hero or a villain through the blindingly simplistic, polarized lens of modern discussion. Was he arrogant and dismissive of others? It would seem so, but those very same people he may have slighted seem to be in near total agreement that the man who spoke 6 languages and was as versed in metaphysical poetry as he was quantum mechanics, who was apparently a star attraction at parties and a surprising hit with the ladies, was maybe one of the few who could boast such arrogance because they had earned the right. These very real sides of Oppenheimer, his womanizing, that he cheated on his wife, that he seemed unwilling to commit to the things he professed belief in, and his unfortunate tendency to shrink from conflict in areas in which he did not feel a complete mastery, appear in the film because they paint the full picture of the man. As many more astute than I have pointed out, the film's subject is Oppenheimer the person, not the gadget he helped usher into the world or the fallout, both literal and metaphorical, from its use. The issue, at least as I see it, is that these non-contextual criticisms aren't relevant to the film's story or the experience it's attempting to create. It's an example of how culture commentators will often use popular media as a springboard to discuss other topics by taking an out-of-context criticism and elevating it to the level of critique, presenting the idea that whatever piece they're discussing has somehow failed either structurally or performatively by the metrics of this other thing. The aforementioned Bechdel test is a perfect example of this. It's a way for those interested to use a specific quantitative metric to make a qualitative statement in pursuit of an ideological commentary. It interests me that many of us that do this thing of talking about movies and media are not unlike many filmmakers in that we always seem to find a way to showcase our interests, ideologies, and philosophies in everything we do. I know I certainly do. But the difference, at least as I see it, is while this is a part of how an artist creates, the role of those in the critical space is to engage with the artist in the context of that creation. Once you begin discussing an issue that is arguably divorced from the context, you're no longer engaging with the work. So at that point, what are you doing? Much like how some people believe Nolan's unwillingness to present a clear moral stance on the film's subject frustrates them, the precision in Nolan's filmmaking often leaves many with nothing to criticize other than what they believe his films are lacking. It's troubling how it's almost taken as a given that a director who has consistently outdone himself with every new outing will produce a film of such exacting quality that the work itself warrants little more than a passing, well, yeah, it looks good, but... And the experience this film creates is just as exacting, as every musical sting or change in aspect ratio or shift in depth of field seems laser cut to fulfill a bespoke purpose in the montage. Oppenheimer not only boasts outstanding performances from a laundry list of top talent, something you can only get from a director who knows how to work with his performers, whether the character is on the page or not. Not only does it feature what is sure to be regarded as some of the best work of cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema's career, it is a genuinely riveting human drama that engages and envelops you on every level, starting by throwing you face first into an image of what the very universe itself may have looked like through the troubled but inarguably brilliant lens of Oppenheimer's perception. Its terrible beauty, assaulting, overwhelming, even a little disturbing. And while those critics are busy lamenting that the film doesn't paint a vivid picture of how terrible the two bombs called Fat Men and Little Boys' reign of fire over Japan was, or how the film showcases the women in Oppenheimer's life only as far as they relate to his story, they seem to be purposely avoiding that the overwhelming focus of the film is about how the man most instrumental to opening the door to the horrors of nuclear war was, from virtually the beginning, one of the most profound voices urging us never to step through it again. The man that had the strength of vision that the atomic bomb could be built faster than human beings could develop the wisdom not to use it, that tried to stall the development of the hydrogen bomb with 4,000 times the destructive potential of the bombs dropped on Japan, and that foresaw the potential for a dangerous game of chicken in a nuclear arms race if the world didn't come together to deal with the issue of atomic and nuclear power as one people. That man's voice was so strong in his beliefs that the government had to conspire to silence him for fear that he would shift the landscape of the conversation and deny them what they saw as a power only they had the right to control. Some critics are arguing that the film isn't sufficiently anti-nuclear enough and even goes as far as to paint Oppenheimer as some kind of hero for building the bomb, while ignoring that his opposing stance on nuclear proliferation dogged and damaged him into his later years. Oppenheimer wasn't trying to put the nuclear genie back in the bottle. He was urging us to come together and find a way to make a collective wish that didn't result in a fucking fireball consuming the world. The film is getting a lot of praise, and rightfully so. But more importantly, the movie is generating a lot of contemplation and conversation. Anecdotally, many people have reported being shocked to their core several times during, with the ending particularly powerful enough to leave them unable to rise from their seats at its conclusion. I personally found the several seconds after the detonation of the Trinity bomb, the near silence and blinding orange-white light of the fireball, to be impossibly beautiful. Its contrast to the deafening boom of the explosion and the strength of the pressure wave that followed served to highlight the scientists and engineers celebrating their accomplishment, seemingly divorced of perspective towards the function the bomb was specifically designed and intended for. That put a weight on my soul as if I was bearing the burden of human guilt for what was unleashed. With my failing eyes still capable of a 20/20 hindsight, I was moved to tears at the thought of the damage that single explosion continues to do. I can only speak for myself here, but in my opinion, depicting those events of August 6, 1945 simply to show how horrible being caught in the blast zone of an atomic explosion is, or for the purpose of pointing charred fingers at the dead in order to stoke guilt in the living, runs dangerously close to exploitation. For anyone to advocate for that just so they can have an excuse to jump on their soapbox is, in my opinion, disrespectful to the existential pain this has caused the whole of the human race. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the fallout from the Trinity test, the fact that we felt so desperately afraid of what one madman would do with all that horrible power that it pushed us to the point anyone felt this was a weapon that needed to exist at all, is a wound in the human soul that will weep for us until the end of time. Anyone seeking to exploit that just to score points on fucking Twitter should be deeply, deeply ashamed of themselves. Oppenheimer is a spectacular film experience, which I believe is difficult for anyone to deny. The fact that it can stir up such sentiment in people who are decades removed from the events it portrays is a testament to the skillful craft of Nolan, his cast, and his able crew of artists and technicians. But the shockwave of the historical event the film is rooted in, the detonation of that first atomic bomb in the unassuming deserts of New Mexico in July of 1945, is still making its way back and forth across the landscape of humanity in a philosophical, moral, and spiritual chain reaction that may never end. Though the far-reaching implications of the choices we made are obvious, the story itself still centers around J. Robert Oppenheimer, as he very well may have felt responsibility for guiding how we ultimately dealt with the fallout of our atomic awakening, and that it was his alone to bear. This is obviously not true, but this is the gift that movies give us, the ability to experience events through the perspective of someone who is not us. Like all movies, this one only asks for us to set aside our own bullshit for a couple of hours, and I don't think that's too much to ask for. I mean, it's not like it's the end of the world. This has been the Narrated, Not the Popular Opinion. As always, I have been Gray, and if you like what you heard, you can leave a tip at our Ko-Fi page at ko-fi.com/notthepopularopinion. You can follow us on Twitter at @only_Gray, and don't forget our main page at notthepopularopinion.wordpress.com, where you'll find more great articles just like this. Thanks again for listening, and remember, if you're as good to others as you are to yourself, we might just make it through this mess. See ya.